The purpose of the Flick Reedy Education Enterprises is to promote individual moral responsibility through education. How do we do this? We study and discuss the interrelationships of history, philosophy, social studies, and economics. We do not dictate. We do not make statements as to what we think you should or should not do. We do not unduly burden this program with footnotes, references, or complete documentation. However, we do give sufficient data to bring this discussion into proper focus. We invite you to delve further into the necessary historical and statistical data to develop a deeper understanding of truth and a keener sense of individual moral responsibility.
Now let's pick up the thread of history again. After Lenin's death, there was a brief power struggle for the leadership spot. Joseph Stalin emerged the victor. He was an iron-willed man who tolerated no differences of opinion. History records numerous purges within the Communist Party during Stalin's leadership. To be purged in the way Stalin did it was not merely removal from office and authority. It meant the secret murder of thousands of communists suspected of not adhering strictly to Stalin's interpretation of communist doctrine and the fulfillment of Lenin's master plan. The very least it meant was arrest and deportation to the Soviet slave labor camps in Siberia, usually never to be heard from again. Trotsky, who escaped the country, was finally murdered in Mexico, allegedly by communist direction. During this time, Stalin and his hand-picked group of top communists were busy consolidating their strength in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. One of Stalin's top lieutenants, a man named Nikita Khrushchev, caused the deliberate starvation of millions and millions of Ukrainians because they resisted the collectivism of farming and the farmlands of the Ukraine, perhaps the richest farmlands in all of the Soviet Union. They let nothing stand in their way, nor anything divert them. They used bribery, lies, blood, brutality, blackmail, together with the most extensive and most successful espionage network in world history. Mass murder or starvation was of no matter, so long as it advanced the cause of communism, the master plan of Lenin for world conquest. The first big break for the communists following the death of Lenin was official diplomatic recognition of the Stalin regime by the United States in 1933. The prestige of this recognition was priceless and enabled the Soviet dictatorship to establish financial credit for their tottering economy. It also enabled them to establish embassies in the United States and elsewhere. Recognition of the Stalin communist regime by the United States was in the tradition of the warm, open-hearted, friendly, and helpful manner of our country. While there may have been some reservations as to how the particular Soviet leaders got to power and remained there, and while this recognition was extended at a time when millions were being deliberately starved to death in the Ukraine for resisting collectivization of their farms, the gesture of recognition by the United States was made to aid world peace and reduce world tensions. While it was generally recognized that the communists held what they called elections, it was also known that these elections were considerably different than our ideas of what elections should be. In the communist elections, there is only one candidate to vote for, the nominee of the party. World War II became the next great opportunity for the communists. Stalin made his non-aggression pact with Adolf Hitler in September 1939. A few days later, Hitler's panzer divisions rolled into Poland. Within 4 weeks, the Soviet Union and Germany were cutting up Poland, dividing the spoils, and the Soviet Union had risked nothing. Next, the communists made their move against tiny Finland. After a short struggle in which the Finns put up a good fight, they were overwhelmed. The military conquest of tiny Finland served as an example. In short order thereafter, the communists took over Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. While the actual takeover was accomplished from within by fifth-column communists, there was the ever-ready presence of the Soviet Red Army to make sure that the communist timetable would stay on schedule. While there was some resistance, it was neither organized nor substantial. Hundreds of thousands of these Baltic peoples were thrown into railroad cars and sent to Siberian slave labor camps, never to be heard from again. If there was any protest anywhere in the world, it must have been slight. Most of the other large nations were too worried and occupied with the problems Adolf Hitler was posing to worry very much about what the Soviet Union had done to Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. The rapid progress of Lenin's master plan was interrupted when once again a pact was broken. With no warning, Germany invaded the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. For a while, it looked as though Germany would overwhelm the Soviet Union. Not only were the Soviet armies poorly equipped, but the military experts they had were hampered by the political commissars attached to every group. For a time, the Soviet people were not very anxious to save the communist regime from defeat. Finally, the people's love for Mother Russia, their homeland, coupled with considerable amounts of American Lend-Lease military supplies and our bombing raids, helped turn the tide. Hitler's hopes of eliminating a fight on his eastern front failed. The German war machine could not sustain two major fronts and finally crumbled. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was saved. It was from this point on that Lenin's master plan, Phase 1, was to be accomplished at an accelerated rate. Do you remember Lenin's Phase 1?
First, we will take Eastern Europe.
By a fateful decision of our government, General Patton and other onrushing Allied armies were halted from capturing East Germany and freeing Czechoslovakia and the Balkans. By agreement, the capture and occupation of almost all of Eastern Europe was reserved for the Communists. In charity, it could be said that this agreement was made, along with others, as an act of faith in our ally, Communist Russia, to demonstrate our confidence in communist integrity. It has proven to be a nightmare from which a significant part of the world's population has been cast into slavery. By infiltration, threat of force, and the proximity of the now well-equipped Red Army, Czechoslovakia, Albania, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Hungary, East Germany, Poland were added to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and Finland as communist puppet states. There were, however, a few voices in the wilderness. Our distinguished ambassador to Poland, Arthur Bliss Lane, resigned his post and put on record in his book, I Saw Poland Betrayed, what he had witnessed of the communist ruthlessness, together with the unaccountable behavior of American and British diplomatic leaders. Ambassador Lane had this to say in his book.
Our policy of appeasement towards Soviet Russia undoubtedly emboldened Stalin to go ahead with his plans for the complete domination of Poland and of all other countries in Eastern Europe.
In Western Europe, the communists were content for the time being to aid in the establishment of socialism as a transition stage to communism. John Strachey, a top official in the Labour Socialist Party of Great Britain in 1950, was for many years an openly avowed communist. In his book titled The Theory and Practice of Socialism, he wrote,
It is impossible to establish communism as the immediate successor to capitalism. Accordingly, it is proposed to establish socialism as something which we can put in the place of our present decaying capitalism. Hence, communists work for the establishment of socialism as a necessary transition stage on the road to communism.
It is significant that in almost every Western European country, not only is there a strong communist party working openly, but that many, if not most, of the prevailing governments are at least socialist-directed, from the Scandinavian countries in the north to Italy in the south. Think it over. During World War II, a strong communist group was established in China, headed by Moscow-trained agents. While the Chinese communists did not fight with the Chinese nationalist forces of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, they did fight against Japan. As yet a further concession to the Soviet Communists, Nationalist China's Chiang Kai-shek was excluded from the conferences following World War II at Yalta and Potsdam. This helped open the door for Stage 2 of Lenin's master plan. Next, the masses of Asia. In North China, Chinese Communist armies under Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai began a campaign against Nationalist China and Chiang Kai-shek. There was a worldwide campaign, but particularly in the United States, to picture Mao Zedong as a great agrarian reformer, and to create hate and distrust of Chiang Kai-shek and his regime as corrupt bandits. This propaganda material found its way into many of America's newspapers, magazines, and other communication media. Agitation became widespread for a truce in China and for a coalition government, together with a stoppage of U.S. military aid to Nationalist China. We were told, "We're tired of war. Why can't those fellows make up and stop fighting?" President Truman sent General George Marshall to urge Chiang Kai-shek to form a coalition government, taking communists into his national government. Chiang reminded us of what happened in Czechoslovakia and elsewhere when that had been done, and steadfastly refused to place communists in his government. General Marshall was able to effect a temporary truce, which it turned out aided the hard-pressed communists by giving them a breather. A few months later, the United States halted all sale of arms and military supplies to Nationalist China. This was backed up by an executive order by President Truman on 18 August 1946. After the arms and military supplies embargo went into effect, the Chinese Communists, supplied with excellent equipment which had been captured by the Soviets in Manchuria late in World War II, began an attack against Nationalist China's forces. The arms embargo was to prove fatal to Nationalist China. Some questions were raised here at home about this turn of events. General Albert Wiedemeyer was sent to China to study the effect of our embargo policy. General Wiedemeyer recommended renewal of support of Chiang Kai-shek as the means of preventing China from falling to the Communists. General Wiedemeyer's report was suppressed by presidential order until after China had fallen to the Communists. The United States Senate made an inquiry which said,
"The Judiciary Committee, in the report it has just issued, finds a conspiracy, communist-inspired, had led to American defeat. High American officials were duped. Policies were influenced that gave the communists their greatest victory. The loss of China after the defeat of Japan represents the greatest defeat in U.S. history."
There was also at this time a young congressman from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy, who expressed himself in the Congressional Record of February 21, 1949, this way.
Over the past few days, we have learned the extent of the disaster of the falling of China. The continued insistence that aid would not be forthcoming unless a coalition government with the communists was formed was a crippling blow to the nationalist government.
This is the tragic story of China, whose freedom we once fought to preserve. Defeated, the government of Nationalist China fled to Formosa, and the communists took over mainland China. Again, the communist pattern was repeated. Whom they could not persuade to their plans, they murdered. Many Chinese owning 2 or 3 acres of land resisted the collectivism of their farms and the breakup of their families, just as had happened in the Ukraine. What happened? More than 20 million Chinese were murdered. The Soviet communists call it liquidation. The Chinese word "tseo mei" means deprived of existence. The result is the same: murder by order of the state. The next move was in Tibet. Thousands were murdered. A reign of terror was instituted. The religious leaders fled. The pattern was established. North Korea was next. The communists took over the government by infiltration. Then, equipped with Soviet and Chinese war material, North Korea attacked South Korea. The United Nations, but principally the United States, came to the aid of South Korea. Our country did not even do the honor to our fighting men of calling this a war. It was designated as a police action. I do not know what the technical diplomatic difference is, but I'm sure the boys in these graves and others still in our hospitals couldn't care less. To them, it was a war, and a tough one. It was a costly war. 54,246 American military men lost their lives, and, in addition, there were 103,284 casualties. Much money was spent in the defense industries, creating many jobs, at least for a while. But that's a high price to pay for some temporary jobs. There are many people who feel we lost the police action. It is certain that in comparison with any other war our country ever fought, we didn't win this one. A stalemate was negotiated. United States military commanders who served in Korea during the actual fighting returned home disillusioned, bitter, and deeply disturbed.
Mark Clark said, "I was not allowed to bomb the numerous bridges that were across the Yalu River, over which the enemy constantly poured its trucks, munitions, and its units."
General Stratemeyer.
You get in war to win it. You do not get into a war to stand still and lose it. And we were required to lose it. We were not permitted to win.
General Douglas MacArthur.
Such a limitation upon the utilization of available military force to repel an enemy attack has no precedent either in our own history or, so far as I know, in the history of the world.
It must be remembered that in Korea, the forces fighting the North Korean and Chinese communists were under the authority of the United Nations, even though the United States provided most of the men, money, and supplies and were led by United States generals in command. But all reports and even battle plans had to be sent to the United Nations, which included quite a few Soviet communists at key posts who had access to our generals' reports and plans. You can see the problem.